The scent hit her first, cloying and alien amidst the familiar aroma of Marcus's Cuban cigars and expensive leather. It was a cheap, sugary perfume, the kind that clung like a desperate memory. Ilara's hand, already trembling, tightened on the cool metal of the filing cabinet drawer in Marcus's home office. The hum of the hurricane warning on the small television in the corner was a distant, angry drone, less immediate than the frantic thumping of her own heart. She'd been looking for the insurance papers for the ranch, their sprawling, isolated Texas property now directly in the path of Hurricane Isolde, a Category 5 monster churning in the Gulf. Marcus had been distant for weeks, his eyes skittering away from hers, his touch fleeting. He'd blamed work stress, the impending storm. Now the drawer slid open with a well-oiled whisper, revealing not insurance documents, but a slim leather folio. Inside, not policies, but one-way first-class tickets to the Cayman Islands. 2 of them, one for Marcus Thorne, the other for a Chantal Dubois, and departure this afternoon. A wave of nausea, potent and disorienting, washed over Ilara, her breath hitched. The air in the opulent office, usually a comfort, now felt thick, suffocating. She could smell the expensive wood polish on the mahogany desk, the faint metallic tang of dread on her own tongue. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the tickets. The date mocked her. Today. He was leaving today, leaving her. A floorboard creaked in the adjoining master bedroom. Marcus, she pushed herself up, legs like water, the tickets clutched in a death grip. The expensive Persian rug felt miles long as she crossed it. He was standing by the window, impeccably dressed in a linen suit, a small, expensive duffel bag at his feet. He turned, a practiced, charming smile already forming, then faltering as he saw her face, the papers in her hand. "Ilara, darling, what are you—" "Who is Chantal Dubois?" Her voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the rising shriek of the wind outside. The first fat raindrops began to spatter against the reinforced windows, like accusations. Marcus's face, usually so expressive, so capable of feigned warmth, went utterly blank. It was a chilling transformation, the mask of the loving husband dissolving to reveal the cold, hard stranger beneath. "It's not what you think." The classic dismissive line. "Isn't it?" She held up the tickets, her hand shaking so violently they rattled. "A romantic getaway while a Category 5 hurricane bears down on your wife? While our home, everything we've built, is about to be flattened?" He sighed, a put-upon sound, as if she were the inconvenience. "Don't be dramatic, Ilara. The ranch is insured. It's just property. And what am I, Marcus? Just property too, to be discarded." The sugary perfume seemed to fill her nostrils again, making her gag. Her stomach churned with a sickening cocktail of betrayal and fear. "This isn't working anymore, Ilara. Hasn't been for a long time." His voice was calm, devoid of any emotion, calculated. "I've moved on. You should too." "Moved on?" She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "We've been married for 15 years. We built this place from nothing, with our bare hands, remember? Or have you conveniently erased that too, along with our joint bank accounts?" The sudden icy realization hit her, the numerous business trips, the late nights. He hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been planning this, systematically. He walked towards his desk, picked up a small, heavy-looking safe. "The accounts were primarily my earnings. I've left you the ranch. It's more than generous." He clicked the safe open, revealing stacks of cash and a few glittering pieces of jewelry she now realized weren't hers. Generous. The word was poison on her tongue. "You're leaving me here to die, Marcus?" The wind howled, a mournful chorus to her despair. The house groaned under its pressure. He actually shrugged, a small, indifferent movement of his shoulders. "The storm cellar is stocked. You'll be fine. You're resourceful." He picked up his duffel. "My flight leaves in 3 hours. I can't be late." Her legs gave out. She sank to her knees, the tickets fluttering to the floor. "Marcus, please." The plea was torn from her, a raw, animal sound of pure anguish. "Don't do this, don't leave me." He paused at the door, not looking back. His hand was on the knob. "The ranch is in your name now. Clean break. I had the papers drawn up last month. They were filed yesterday." He pulled a small metallic object from his pocket. A key. He tossed it onto the polished floor near her. It skittered and came to rest a few feet away. "That's for the old truck, the one in the barn. If it still runs, there's a little gas in it. Enough to get you to the highway if you leave right now. Though frankly, with Isolde this close, I wouldn't risk it." He opened the door. The wind snatched at it, trying to rip it from his grasp. "Goodbye, Ilara." And then he was gone. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a sound of utter finality, the expensive lock clicking into place. She heard the distant roar of his sports car starting up, then fading into the crescent fury of the storm. She was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone, in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb, with a hurricane named Isolde preparing to unleash its apocalyptic rage. The scent of his cigars was fading, replaced by the damp, earthy smell of the approaching storm and the lingering phantom sweetness of cheap perfume. Her hands, still trembling, were ice-cold. He hadn't just left her. He'd meticulously, cruelly orchestrated her desolation, stripping her of everything but the very ground beneath her feet, a ground that was about to be swallowed by the sea. The key on the floor glinted faintly in the gloomy light, a tiny, cruel mockery of an escape route. He hadn't even left her the dignity of a choice. He'd left her with an impossible one. The walls seemed to press in, and the first shattering crack of a window pane in the sunroom echoed the breaking of her world. The wind was a living entity, a malevolent beast clawing at Whispering Wind's ranch. Ilara lay curled on the cold tile floor of the storm cellar, the steel door bolted, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and fear. Above, the main house was being torn apart. The sounds a symphony of destruction, the screech of metal, the roar of timber splintering, the percussive crash of debris. Each impact was a fresh stab of terror, a physical manifestation of Marcus's abandonment. He'd said the cellar was stocked. It was in the most literal, minimal sense. A few dusty cans of beans, some crackers long past their prime, and a half-dozen bottles of water. Enough for a day, maybe two if she rationed. Resourceful, he'd called her. The word was a bitter laugh caught in her throat. Hours bled into an eternity of darkness and noise. The concrete floor vibrated beneath her, the very earth seeming to tremble. She clutched a thin, moth-eaten blanket Marcus had relegated to the cellar years ago, its scratchy wool offering no comfort. Her teeth chattered, not just from the damp chill, but from a bone-deep shock that had yet to fully thaw into comprehensible grief. All she felt was a raw, gaping wound where her life used to be. The image of his face, so cold and dismissive, played on a loop in her mind. It's just property. When an eerie silence finally descended, it was almost more terrifying than the cacophony. It was the silence of the grave, the aftermath of total devastation. Hesitantly, her muscles screaming in protest, Ilara unbolted the heavy steel door. Daylight, grey and weak, filtered down the narrow concrete steps. The air that met her was heavy with the stench of salt water, pulverized vegetation, and something acrid, like wet ash. The ranch was gone, not damaged, but obliterated. The main house, their beautiful, sprawling home filled with 15 years of memories, was a jagged pile of rubble, its foundations exposed like broken bones. The barns, the stables, the carefully tended gardens all flattened or simply vanished, swept away by the storm surge and the winds. The landscape was unrecognizable, a nightmarish tableau of mud, twisted metal, and debris stretching as far as the eye could see. Nature, in its most brutal form, had reclaimed everything. The ancient live oaks that had lined the driveway were uprooted, their massive root balls exposed to the sky like grotesque sculptures. She stumbled through the wreckage, a ghost in her own ruined life. The old truck Marcus had so generously left her a key for was a mangled heap of rust, half submerged in a newly formed brackish pond where the rose garden used to be. So much for that escape route. No electricity, the lines were down everywhere. The solar panels they'd installed were twisted scraps. The wellhead was choked with debris. No clean water beyond the meager bottles in the cellar. Food was the few cans. Communication was impossible. The satellite phone was buried somewhere in the ruins of the house, its battery likely dead, even if she could find it. The first challenge was thirst. The water bottles wouldn't last. She remembered an old rain barrel behind the one small, miraculously still-standing section of the tool shed. It was half full of murky, leaf-strewn water. Desperate, she found an old T-shirt in the mud, rinsed it as best she could, and used it to filter the water into one of the empty bottles. It tasted of earth and despair, but it was wet. The roof of the shed section was leaking, not just in one place, but in dozens. That night, as a cold, relentless rain began to fall the backside of the hurricane, she huddled in the driest corner she could find, the sound of drips a constant, maddening torment. Hunger gnawed at her. She opened a can of beans with a jagged piece of metal she'd found, eating them cold, the metallic tang mixing with the grit in her mouth. The hostile environment pressed in. The air hummed with mosquitoes, birthed by the standing water. Snakes, displaced from their homes, slithered through the debris. The nights were filled with unfamiliar rustlings and the distant howls of coyotes, bolder now that human presence had been so violently diminished. Fences were non-existent. If any of their few remaining livestock had survived, they were long gone. It was on the third day, sifting through the mud-caked ruins of what was once her kitchen, searching for anything salvageable, that she found it. Tucked into a rusted, surprisingly intact biscuit tin, amidst a collection of old, forgotten recipes, was a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were water-stained and fragile, the ink faded in places, but legible. It belonged to a woman named Agnes Periwinkle, who had lived on this very land a century before. Ilara sank onto a broken piece of timber, her fingers raw and blistered, carefully turning the delicate pages. Agnes wrote of hardship, of drought and floods, of loneliness and resilience. She wrote of planting by the moon, of natural remedies, of building and rebuilding with her own two hands. The land gives, but it also takes, one entry read. It demands respect and hard work, but it will sustain those who are willing to listen and learn. That night, huddled in the leaking shed, the diary clutched to her chest, was her first night of true, visceral despair. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind an aching void. The reality of her situation, abandoned, destitute, utterly alone in a wasteland, crashed down with full force. Tears came then, hot and furious, carving clean tracks through the grime on her face. She sobbed until her throat was raw, until she was empty. What was the point? Marcus had won. He'd broken her. The thought of just walking away, of letting the wilderness or starvation claim her, was a seductive whisper in the suffocating darkness. She could just lie down and not get up. Then a small, tentative sound cut through her misery. A faint, high-pitched cluck. Her head snapped up, another cluck, closer this time. Holding her breath, she peered out of a crack in the shed wall. There, picking their way delicately through the debris as if it were merely an inconvenient obstacle course, were 3 bedraggled hens. Their feathers were matted with mud. One was missing half its tail feathers, but they were alive. Survivors. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark ignited in the desolate landscape of her heart. Agnes's diary, with its tales of a woman's grit. And now these chickens, stubbornly pecking at the ruined earth. They hadn't given up. Maybe, just maybe, she couldn't either. The diary felt warm in her hands, a fragile link to a strength she didn't know she possessed. It wasn't much, just a handful of nearly dead chickens and a dead woman's words, but in that moment of utter rock bottom, it was the first faint glimmer of a star in an otherwise black sky. Tomorrow, she thought, her voice a dry rasp in her own ears. Tomorrow she would try to catch those chickens. Tomorrow she would try to find a less leaky patch for her shelter. Tomorrow she would begin. The decision to survive wasn't a dramatic revelation, but a quiet, stubborn ember fanned by desperation. The next morning, stiff and sore, Ilara's first concrete action was to try and secure the chickens. It was a comical, frustrating endeavor, chasing the skittish birds through the wreckage. But after an hour of coaxing and cornering, she managed to herd them into a relatively intact section of a collapsed coop, patching the holes with salvaged planks and wire. Their bewildered clucking was the first sound of life, other than her own ragged breathing, that didn't fill her with dread. Her hands, soft and manicured just days ago, were now blistered and raw. Every muscle ached, but Agnes's diary became her unlikely tutor. "A tight roof is the first kindness to oneself," Agnes had written. Ilara studied the remaining section of the tool shed. The main beams were surprisingly sound. Using a rusted handsaw she'd found half buried in mud and a hammer with a wobbly head, she began scavenging. Twisted sheets of corrugated iron, splintered planks, even large pieces of plastic debris, anything that could offer a barrier against the rain. It was slow, agonizing work. Her first attempts to patch the roof were pitiful. The pieces wouldn't fit, nails bent, and she nearly fell more than once. Frustration brought her to tears several times, but the thought of another night sleeping in a puddle drove her on. She remembered Agnes's words about listening to the wood, letting it guide your hand. It sounded like nonsense, but in her exhaustion, she found a strange rhythm, a focus that pushed away the despair. Days blurred into a routine of scavenging, patching and foraging. She found a few more cans of food in the cellar ruins, their labels long gone. Each one was a lottery. She learned to identify a few edible wild greens Agnes had described, dandelion, purslane. The chickens, bless their resilient hearts, started laying eggs after a week, small and precious orbs that she cooked over a tiny, smoky fire built in a sheltered nook between two fallen walls. Each egg felt like a miracle. One sweltering afternoon, about 3 weeks after the storm, as Ilara was wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of roofing tin, a shadow fell over her. She jumped, heart hammering, brandishing the wobbly hammer like a weapon. An old woman stood there, her face a road map of wrinkles, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She was small and wiry, clad in practical denim, a faded bandana tied around her grey hair. In her hand, she carried a small basket. "Thought I saw smoke," the woman said, her voice raspy but firm. "Hurricane didn't take everyone then." Ilara lowered the hammer, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and a sudden desperate hope for human contact. "No," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It didn't take me." The woman's gaze swept over Ilara's disheveled appearance, the patched-up shed, the general devastation. There was no pity in her eyes, only a kind of weary understanding. "Maria Sanchez," she introduced herself, "from over yonder ridge. Took me this long to clear a path." She gestured vaguely to the east. "Heard the Thorn place got hit bad. Figured no one made it." "Ilara Thorn," she replied, then corrected herself, a strange sense of liberation in the words. "Just Ilara now." Maria nodded slowly, as if this explained much. She didn't pry. Instead, she opened her basket. Inside were a thermos of what smelled like coffee, a loaf of dark homemade bread, and a small jar of jam. "Figured you could use this more than me." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. It was the first act of pure, unadulterated kindness she'd received in what felt like a lifetime. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. Maria appeared gradually over the next few weeks. At first, She'd just leave small offerings, fresh water from her well, a few vegetables from her garden. Then she started staying a little longer, offering quiet advice, gleaned from a lifetime of living off this often unforgiving land. She showed Ilara how to properly set a snare for rabbits. Only if you were truly desperate, child. They have their place too. How to identify which wild berries were safe, how to reinforce the shed walls against the persistent wind. She never once mentioned Marcus. Ilara, guided by Agnes's diary and Maria's practical wisdom, began to learn. She found a tattered copy of a Farmer S. Almanac from the 1950s in the biscuit tin with the diary, its pages filled with planting charts and advice on soil enrichment. In a waterlogged trunk dragged from the barn ruins, she discovered a small, sealed tin containing packets of old seeds. Heirloom tomatoes, strange-looking squash, herbs she didn't recognize. Agnes had written about saving seeds, about the importance of these old varieties. They hold the memory of the land, she'd penned. With painstaking effort, Ilara cleared a small patch of land near the shed, away from the worst of the salt-blasted soil. She turned the earth with a bent spade, her back screaming in protest, her hands permanently stained. She planted the old seeds, unsure if anything would grow. She learned to read the sky for rain, to feel the subtle shifts in the wind. She learned the names of the birds that returned, the cadence of the crickets at night. The struggles were immense. One night, a pack of coyotes, drawn by the scent of the chickens, tore through her flimsy coop repairs, killing one of her precious hens. Ilara had cried with rage and helplessness, then spent the next day grimly reinforcing the structure with heavier timbers and more wire, her face set in a mask of determination. Another time, a sudden downpour washed away a row of newly sprouted seedlings. Each setback was a blow, but each time, after a period of despair, she would pick herself up, driven by a primal need to not just survive, but to make something survive. Her body changed. The soft city curves hardened into lean muscle. Her skin, constantly exposed to sun and wind, darkened and weathered. Her voice, once hesitant, grew stronger from shouting at stubborn materials and occasionally at the indifferent sky. Then came the day, nearly 2 months after the storm, when she walked out to her small, struggling garden and saw it. A tiny, perfect, bright red tomato nestled amongst the green leaves of a plant she'd almost given up on. It was no bigger than her thumb, but it was a jewel, a vibrant testament to life in the midst of so much death. She picked it carefully, its skin warm from the sun. She sank to her knees in the dirt, the tomato held gently in her palm, and she wept. Not tears of despair this time, but tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief and a fierce, unexpected joy. It was so small, this victory. A single tomato. But it was hers. She had coaxed it from the ruined earth with her own battered hands. In that moment, holding that tiny fruit, Ilara knew she wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a rebuilder. The taste of that tomato, when she finally bit into it, was the sweetest thing she had ever known, the taste of hope. The small garden, nurtured with a fierce tenacity, began to yield more than just sustenance. It became a bridge. Caleb Mattis and his daughter Lily lived on a ranch a few miles west, relatively untouched by Isolde's worst fury, but not entirely unscathed. Caleb, a veterinarian by trade, had come by one scorching afternoon, his old truck rattling up the barely cleared track Maria had first used. He'd heard from Maria that someone was still at the old Thorn place and had come to offer help, a quiet man with kind eyes that held a familiar shadow of loss. His wife, he later shared, had been taken by a sudden illness 3 years prior, leaving him to raise Lily alone. Lily, a wisp of a girl with bright, curious eyes and a tangle of sun-bleached hair, was about 7. She was shy at first, hiding behind her father's legs, peering at Ilara with solemn intensity. The chickens were her first point of contact. Ilara had managed to nurture her small flock, and Lily was mesmerized by them. Ilara showed her how to gently collect the eggs, her voice softer than it had been in months. Caleb, practical and capable, helped Ilara with tasks that were beyond her strength or expertise. He showed her how to properly repair the well pump, his large, calloused hands working with a gentle precision. He didn't offer pity, but respect, marveling at what she'd already accomplished with so little. They fell into an easy rhythm of shared work, mending fences that bordered their properties, clearing debris that had washed downstream. He'd bring Lily, and while the adults worked, Lily would explore Ilara's burgeoning garden, her initial shyness slowly melting away. One afternoon, Ilara was trying to trellis her surprisingly prolific heirloom tomato plants, using salvaged lengths of pipe and twine. Her hands were clumsy with the unfamiliar task. Lily watched, then quietly picked up a stray piece of twine, and with surprising dexterity showed Ilara a knot her grandmother had taught her. "Like this," she said, her small voice clear. "It holds tighter." Ilara smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. It was a small moment but significant. Lily wasn't just observing anymore, she was participating, offering her own small wisdom. Trust between Ilara and Caleb built slowly, like a well-tended crop. It was rooted in shared labor and mutual respect, in the quiet understanding of two people who had known profound loss and were finding their way back. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their past lives, their dreams, their heartaches. Ilara found herself speaking of Marcus, not with the raw agony of before, but with a growing sense of detachment, like describing a character in a sad, distant story. Caleb listened patiently, his silence more comforting than any platitude. He, in turn, spoke of his late wife, Sarah, of her laughter and her love for the land, his voice thick with a grief that was still present, but no longer all-consuming. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, spent rebuilding a section of collapsed barn wall that Caleb needed for his own recovering livestock, they sat on the rickety porch of Ilara's shed home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Lily was asleep inside, curled on a makeshift bed Ilara had fashioned. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the chirp of crickets. "You've done wonders here, Ilara," Caleb said, his voice low. "When I first came, I didn't think it was possible." Ilara looked out at the small patches of green, the repaired structures, the neat rows of her garden. It was still a far cry from what Whispering Winds had been, but it was hers, built from ashes. "I had good teachers," she said, thinking of Agnes's diary and Maria's gruff kindness. "And good neighbors." She smiled at him. He met her gaze, his own smile hesitant but warm. "You know, Lily asked me the other day if you were a flower farmer," he said, a touch of amusement in his tone. "Because you make broken things beautiful again." Ilara's heart swelled, the innocent wisdom of a child, cutting straight to the heart of what she was trying to do. She felt a blush creep up her neck. "That's very sweet of her." The air between them crackled with an unspoken energy. Caleb's gaze lingered on her face, his expression soft. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. It was a simple gesture, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. His touch was warm, firm, reassuring. They had just managed, after weeks of effort, to get an old generator working, salvaged from Caleb's barn and painstakingly repaired with parts scrounged from the wreckage of 3 others. The single bare bulb Ilara had rigged inside the shed flickered to life, casting a warm, if unsteady, glow. It was a small triumph, but after months of living by firelight and the moon, it felt monumental. They stood there, side by side, grimy and exhausted, watching the bulb glow. A shared laugh of pure, unadulterated relief bubbled up between them. And then, spontaneously, fueled by exhaustion, triumph, and the undeniable current that had been building for weeks, Caleb leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss, but one of tenderness, of recognition. His lips were chapped from the sun, tasting faintly of dust and sweet tea. Ilara's hands instinctively came up to rest on his strong arms. It was a kiss that spoke of shared hardship and burgeoning hope, a quiet promise of new beginnings under the glow of a single, hard-won light bulb. When they finally drew apart, breathless, the crickets seemed to sing a little louder, the Texas night a little less lonely. Lily stirred inside, murmuring in her sleep, a gentle reminder of the fragile, precious new connections being forged in the heart of the storm's aftermath. The kiss was a turning point, a bloom of personal hope that soon began to spread outwards. Ilara's small garden, initially a means of survival, started to produce a surprising abundance. The heirloom tomatoes, nurtured with such care, were prolific, their flavors intense and unique. The strange-looking squash varieties from Agnes's seeds grew into fantastical shapes and colors. Her herbs thrived. With Caleb's help, she'd repaired enough of an old pickup truck, a different one, found further afield and painstakingly brought back to life, to make trips to the nearest town, where a small farmer's market was struggling to re-establish itself post-hurricane. Her first market day was terrifying. Her hands, calloused and strong from farm work, trembled as she laid out her meager offerings on a borrowed table. A few dozen eggs, a small basket of vibrant tomatoes, bunches of fresh herbs tied with twine. People, their faces etched with their own stories of loss and rebuilding, were drawn to the quality, the unusual varieties, the sheer fact that something so beautiful could emerge from such devastation. Her first sale, $2 for a bunch of basil, made her want to weep. It wasn't the money, but the validation. She was contributing, creating, not just taking. She began to call her burgeoning enterprise Phoenix Ranch, a name that spoke of rising from the ashes. Agnes's diary continued to be her guide. It contained recipes for preserving food, for making herbal remedies, for companion planting that naturally deterred pests. Ilara experimented, innovated. She made sun-dried tomatoes, rich and flavorful. She crafted herbal tea blends. Her small-batch jams, made from wild berries, Maria showed her, and the few fruit trees she managed to salvage and nurture, became highly sought after. As Phoenix Ranch slowly grew, Ilara noticed other women in the community, women who had lost homes, livelihoods, even husbands in the storm or in the quiet desperations of rural life. She saw their struggles mirrored in her own past. One day, a young woman named Sarah, whose husband had abandoned her and her 2 small children after their farm was flooded, approached Ilara at the market, her eyes hollow with despair. She'd heard Ilara was hiring. Ilara didn't have much to offer in terms of wages, but she had land, knowledge, and a growing surplus. "I can't pay much," Ilara told her honestly, "but I can teach you. We can work together, share what we grow." Sarah agreed, her gratitude palpable. Ilara taught her how to plant, to harvest, to preserve. She showed her how to tend the chickens, how to make the herbal salves Agnes had written about, which were surprisingly effective for soothing insect bites and small wounds. Soon, another woman, Martha, widowed and struggling to keep her small plot of land, joined them. Then a teenager, Rosa, who needed a safe place to work and learn after dropping out of school. Phoenix Ranch transformed. It became less about Ilara's individual survival and more about a collective effort. The women worked together, sharing their skills, their burdens, their laughter. They built a larger, more robust chicken coop. They expanded the gardens. With Caleb's engineering know-how and salvaged materials, they even constructed a small, rudimentary greenhouse to extend their growing season. They started a small roadside stand, which, over the next year, with Caleb's help in constructing a more permanent building, grew into a charming farm shop and a tiny cafe serving simple, delicious food made from their produce. They used natural farming methods, Learning from Agnes' diary and modern organic practices, Ilara researched during rare trips to the town library. The physical space of the ranch mirrored this internal and communal growth. The scars of the hurricane were still visible, but they were now woven into a tapestry of new life. Wildflowers, encouraged by Ilara, bloomed amidst the repaired fences. The air hummed with the sound of bees, drawn to the chemical-free crops. The once silent land was now filled with the sounds of women working, children playing, Sarah's children often accompanied her, and the gentle clucking of contented hens. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 years after Isolde, a car pulled up to Phoenix Ranch. A journalist from a regional agricultural magazine had heard about their story, the woman who'd rebuilt from nothing, the community of women creating abundance from scarcity. She spent the day with Ilara, Sarah, Martha, and Rosa, listening to their stories, photographing the vibrant gardens, the bustling farm shop. The article, when it came out, was titled "The Women of Phoenix Ranch, Resilience in Bloom." It spoke of Ilara's initial abandonment, her grit, and how she had transformed her personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. Soon after, Phoenix Ranch received a small, local award for outstanding contribution to community resilience and sustainable agriculture. At the small awards ceremony held in the town hall, Ilara stood tall, no longer the cowering, broken woman Marcus had left behind. Her voice, when she accepted the award on behalf of all the women of Phoenix Ranch, was clear and confident. She wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, her hands no longer soft, but capable and strong. She spoke of the land, of the importance of community, of the strength found in supporting one another. Caleb and Lily were in the front row, their faces beaming, looking out at the crowd, at the faces of the women who now depended on and contributed to the ranch. Ilara felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. It wasn't the life she had envisioned 15 years ago, but it was a life rich in meaning, a life she had built, seed by seed, brick by brick, hand in hand with others. The wind outside the town hall whispered through the trees, no longer a threat, but a gentle reminder of the ever-present cycle of destruction and renewal. Another year passed, marked by the rhythm of planting and harvesting, of challenges met and overcome. Phoenix Ranch was thriving. The farm shop was a local hub, the cafe a popular weekend spot. Ilara, with Caleb's steady support, had even started offering workshops, teaching sustainable gardening and food preservation techniques to others in the wider community. Lily, now a bright 10-year-old, was a permanent fixture at the ranch after school, her laughter echoing through the fields as she helped Ilara with tasks, her bond with the woman who had become a mother figure to her, deep and unshakable. Then, one sweltering July afternoon, a sleek, expensive rental car, incongruous against the rustic backdrop of the ranch, pulled up the long gravel driveway. Ilara was in the herb garden, her hands fragrant with basil and thyme, discussing crop rotation with Sarah. She looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the car. He was thinner, his expensive suit rumpled, his once immaculate hair now showing streaks of grey at the temples. The arrogant confidence that had been his hallmark was gone, replaced by a weary, almost haunted look. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant, productive landscape, the neatly painted farm shop, the distant sounds of women's voices and children's laughter. It was a world away from the desolate ruin he had abandoned her to. Ilara felt a jolt, a phantom ache of old wounds, but it was distant, overlaid by years of healing and hard-won strength. She straightened, wiping her earthy hands on her apron, her posture unconsciously tall and rooted. Sarah, sensing the tension, moved quietly to stand beside her, a silent show of support. "Ilara," Marcus said, his voice huskier than she remembered, uncertain. Marcus. Her own voice was calm, steady. The years of shouting orders to the wind, of speaking with conviction to her team, of addressing community groups, had forged a new resonance in it. He gestured vaguely at the surroundings. "This is impressive. You've done well." There was a note of disbelief, perhaps even envy in his tone. "We've worked hard," Ilara replied simply, the "we" encompassing not just herself, but the entire community she had fostered. An awkward silence hung in the humid air. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Things didn't work out for me," he said, his gaze dropping to the dusty ground. "Chantel. She left, took most of what was left. Bad investments." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Turns out I wasn't as smart as I thought." Ilara felt a flicker of something, not pity, not triumph, but a kind of sad recognition of a life squandered. He looked like a man who had lost his way, who had built his life on foundations as unstable as the sand he'd sought refuge on. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and she meant it, not for him specifically, but for the waste of it all. There was no malice in her, no desire for revenge. The best revenge, she had learned, was a life well lived, a self rebuilt, stronger than before. He looked up then, a desperate, searching look in his eyes. "Ilara, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was a fool." He took a hesitant step towards her. Maybe there's a chance. For us." Ilara didn't flinch, didn't waver. She simply looked at him, the man who had once held her entire world in his hands and had carelessly, cruelly crushed it. She saw him clearly now, stripped of his power and charm, just a diminished man looking for a lifeline he himself had severed. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle but firm, utterly resolute. "That woman you left behind in the hurricane, she doesn't exist anymore. I built a new life here, a good life, with good people." She glanced towards the farm shop where Caleb had just emerged, Lily skipping at his side. Caleb caught her eye, a question in his, then understanding. He didn't approach, respecting her space, but his presence was a solid, reassuring anchor. Marcus followed her gaze. He saw Caleb, saw Lily run towards Ilara and hug her leg. He saw the easy affection, the sense of belonging. The fight seemed to drain out of him. His shoulders slumped. He looked, for the first time, truly defeated. "I see," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He fumbled for his car keys. "Well, I wish you happiness, Ilara." He turned and got back into his expensive, out-of-place car. As he drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust, Ilara watched him go, not with hatred but with a profound sense of closure. He was a ghost from a past life, a life that no longer had any hold on her. The wind rustled the leaves in the tall pecan trees she and Caleb had planted last spring, whispering not of storms, but of peace and resilience. She had faced her past, not with cruelty, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who knew her own worth, a worth forged in fire and watered by her own tears and sweat. The following spring, as the bluebonnets carpeted the Texas hillsides and the air thrummed with the promise of new life, Ilara and Caleb were married. The ceremony wasn't in a stuffy church or an opulent hall, but right there at Phoenix Ranch, under the vast open sky, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their shared labor and love. The altar was a simple wooden arch Caleb had built, entwined with climbing roses Ilara had nurtured from cuttings. Guests sat on hay bales, covered with colorful hand-stitched quilts made by the women of the ranch. Sarah, Martha, and Rosa, their faces beaming, were her attendants. Lily, radiant in a dress Ilara had sewn, scattered petals from Agnes Periwinkle's heirloom roses down the grassy aisle. Maria Sanchez, her eyes twinkling, sat in a place of honor. Ilara walked down that aisle on her own, her head held high, her steps confident. She wore a simple, elegant linen dress. her hands holding a bouquet of wildflowers and herbs picked that morning from her gardens. Her gaze met Caleb's, and in his eyes she saw not just love, but a deep, unwavering respect and partnership. Their vows weren't flowery or poetic, but simple, heartfelt promises to continue building, supporting and loving one another through all of life's seasons. The reception was a joyous community feast. Tables laden with food grown on the ranch, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, pies bursting with fruit stretched across the main yard, near where the ruined main house had once stood. Music played, a local band Caleb knew, and laughter mingled with the gentle evening breeze. Ilara looked around at the faces, her team, her friends, her new family. Each person there was a thread in the strong, vibrant tapestry she had woven from the tattered remnants of her old life. She thought back to that devastating day Marcus had left, the scent of his betrayal, the terrifying roar of the approaching hurricane. She remembered huddling in the storm cellar, feeling so utterly alone, so completely broken. Now, standing in the same spot, but transformed the cellar now a cool storage for their preserves and wines, the land around it teeming with life and love, the contrast was almost overwhelming. The air was filled not with the sugary scent of deceit, but with the aroma of wood smoke from the barbecue, the sweetness of blooming jasmine, and the earthy fragrance of the good Texas soil. Her hands, once trembling with fear, were now clasped firmly in Caleb's strong, warm ones. Later, as the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky, Ilara found herself standing by the edge of the main vegetable garden with Lily. The little girl, tired but happy, leaned against her. "Mommy Ilara," Lily said softly, her voice sleepy. She had started calling her that, tentatively at first, then with a natural ease that melted Ilara's heart every time. "Agnes would have liked our party, don't you think?" Ilara smiled, looking at the rows of thriving plants, the legacy of a woman she'd never met, but who had become her silent mentor. "Yes, sweetie, I think she would have loved it." She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that Agnes Periwinkle's spirit lived on in every seed planted, every harvest gathered, every act of kindness shared on this resilient piece of land. Phoenix Ranch became more than just a successful business. It became a testament to the power of community, resilience, and the healing capacity of nature and human connection. Ilara, a respected leader and mentor, continued to expand their programs, offering apprenticeships to young women, creating a network of local sustainable farms, ensuring that the lessons of scarcity creating abundance were passed on. Years later, Lily, now a young woman with her mother's kind eyes, and Ilara's determined spirit would walk these same fields, her own children playing amongst the rows of heirloom tomatoes and fragrant herbs, continuing the legacy. The wind still whispered through Whispering Winds, now Phoenix Ranch, but its song was different. It sang of a woman who, abandoned to the storm, had not only weathered it but had learned to dance in the rain, cultivating a garden of hope from the deepest despair, proving that even from the most barren ground, life, love, and a powerful, enduring legacy could, and indeed would, bloom.